Star Trek. The Next Generation wasn't supposed to succeed. Patrick Stewart lived out of a suitcase, convinced the show would be canceled.
Understandable.
The studio hated him for being bald and British. A lawyer rewrote scripts in the middle of the night without anyone's permission. And the original villains were so embarrassing they had to be replaced by a completely different species.
My name is Croesus.
These are some crazy facts about the show that almost killed its lead actress, turned its villains into a joke, and became one of the greatest sci-fi series ever made. 1. The Suitcase Panic. Patrick Stewart was absolutely convinced he was a temporary placeholder who would be replaced by a real American television star within weeks. His agent told him the show was doomed and would be canceled before the first season even finished airing. So, Stewart lived out of a single suitcase for the first 6 months of production, refusing to unpack, refusing to settle into Los Angeles. He was a classically trained Shakespearean actor who took his craft deadly seriously. He famously yelled at his castmates during an early rehearsal, "We are not here to have fun." A quote that his co-stars, especially Jonathan Frakes, still tease him about decades later. Stewart genuinely believed that acting in a science fiction television show was beneath his talents, that he was sacrificing his legitimate theater career for a paycheck. The irony, Star Trek: The Next Generation became the role that defined his entire career. It made him far more famous than any stage production ever could. 2. The Ghost of Gene Roddenberry. Gene Roddenberry's personal lawyer, Leonard Maizlish, became an unofficial shadow producer on The Next Generation, wielding enormous power despite having no official creative role. Maizlish was known to rewrite scripts in the middle of the night without the knowledge or consent of the actual writing staff, often injecting Roddenberry's increasingly eccentric no-conflict philosophy. That philosophy insisted Starfleet officers would never disagree or argue with each other in the utopian 24th century. This made it nearly impossible to create dramatic tension or interesting character dynamics. The interference became so intolerable that almost the entire original writing team either quit or was fired by the end of the first season. The behind-the-scenes chaos was legendary. Professional screenwriters reduced to tears trying to navigate Roddenberry's contradictory demands and Maizlish's unauthorized rewrites. It took Roddenberry's declining health in later seasons for the show to escape his creative stranglehold and become the series fans actually love. 3. The Stolen Royalties theme. The iconic theme music for The Next Generation is a blend of Alexander Courage's original 1960s series fanfare and Jerry Goldsmith's majestic score from Star Trek: The Motion Picture. But there's a dark story behind the original series theme that haunted the franchise for decades. Gene Roddenberry wrote lyrics to the original Star Trek theme that were never used and never intended to be used. He wrote them solely so he could claim 50% of the performance royalties as a co-composer. So even though his contribution was completely worthless, this cynical move drove Alexander Courage, the actual composer who created one of the most recognizable themes in television history, to quit the franchise in disgust. He refused to work with Roddenberry ever again. It's one of the ugliest financial betrayals in Hollywood history, and it reveals a side of Roddenberry that the carefully cultivated great bird of the galaxy mythology tries to hide. 4. The Code of Honor disaster. The Season 1 episode. Code of Honor is widely regarded as the worst episode in Star Trek history, possibly one of the most embarrassing pieces of television ever produced by the franchise. The director was fired mid-production for his racially insensitive and offensive handling of the all-black alien cast. The Ligonians were portrayed as primitive, tribal. They end backwards in ways that evoked every ugly racist stereotype about African cultures. Jonathan Frakes later publicly called the episode a racist piece of garbage. The entire cast has spent decades trying to distance themselves from it, trying to erase it from the series' legacy. The episode is so toxic that it's frequently excluded from streaming playlists and retrospective discussions. It stands as a permanent stain on the show's first season that no amount of later excellence can fully wash away. 5. Worf's missing forehead. If you watch Season 1 carefully and then compare it to later seasons, you'll notice that Lieutenant Worf's forehead prosthetic is significantly smoother and simpler in the early episodes. Between Season 1 and Season 2, the original prosthetic mold was stolen from the makeup trailer during a break in production, and the thief was never caught. The makeup department lost weeks of work. Rather than trying to exactly recreate the original design, the team took the opportunity to build a much more aggressive, heavily ridged forehead. One that gave Michael Dorn a more imposing and alien appearance. Dorn wore this redesigned prosthetic for the next 15 years, across the Next Generation, Deep Space Nine, and 4 feature films. It became one of the most recognizable makeup designs in television history. The theft accidentally improved the character's visual design, a happy accident that defined Klingon aesthetics for an entire generation. 6. The android growth spurt. Brent Spiner originally wanted to play Data with absolutely zero emotion. A completely blank android who processed information without any personality whatsoever. But during early rehearsals, he realized that approach made the character deeply unlikable. Impossible for audiences to connect with emotionally. Spiner pivoted to playing Data with perpetual curiosity, a childlike wonder about human behavior that made him endearing instead of creepy. During the pilot, Spiner wore a yellow-gold makeup that caused severe skin irritation and allergic reactions. The makeup team had to switch to a more pearl metallic base with different chemical composition. This change actually affected how Data was lit on set, giving him a softer, more luminous appearance that made him feel more alive and sympathetic. And the combination of Spiner's performance adjustment and the makeup redesign transformed Data from a potential disaster into one of the most beloved characters in Star Trek history. 7. The No Chairs Bridge. In Gene Roddenberry's early concept sketches and design documents for the Next Generation, the bridge of the Enterprise D didn't have any chairs. Roddenberry genuinely believed that in the utopian future of the 24th century, humans would be so physically evolved and mentally disciplined that they wouldn't need to sit down during their shifts. The actors immediately revolted when they saw the standing-only bridge design. They pointed out that standing for 12-hour shooting days while wearing tight spandex uniforms would cause injuries and potentially trigger a union strike. The luxury captain's chair and the comfortable bridge stations were added at the last minute as a compromise. They became one of the most iconic elements of the show's visual design. Roddenberry's utopian philosophy frequently clashed with the practical realities of actually making television. This was just one of many battles where common sense had to override his increasingly bizarre creative demands. 8. The spandex back injuries. The Season 1 one-piece Lycra uniforms were deliberately ordered one size too small for every actor. The goal, ensure they would look completely wrinkle-free and sleek on camera. But the skin-tight costumes were so restrictive and uncomfortable that they began causing the cast chronic back pain, muscle cramps, and severe skin rashes from constant friction. Patrick Stewart's personal chiropractor eventually sent a formal warning to the studio. The uniforms were literally compressing the actors' spines, causing potential permanent damage to their skeletal structure. The medical threat forced the costume department to completely redesign the uniforms, switching to two-piece wool outfits in Season 3 that were looser, more breathable, and didn't require the cast to suffer physical injury just to look futuristic. The uniform change is one of the most visible differences between early and later seasons of the show. It happened entirely because the original costumes were medically dangerous. 9. The Ferengi Fail. The Ferengi were originally conceived and designed to be the new Klingons. The primary, terrifying villains of the Next Generation who would pose a genuine military and philosophical threat to the Federation. But during their first appearance in the episode The Last Outpost, the actors playing the Ferengi were directed to move with exaggerated hissing sounds and bizarre hopping movements. They looked absolutely ridiculous instead of menacing. The production crew and studio executives watching the dailies burst out laughing at how absurd the Ferengi looked. The writers immediately realized they'd created a joke instead of a credible antagonist. The Ferengi were instantly demoted to comic relief space capitalists obsessed with profit. The show had to introduce the Borg in Season 2 to fill the villain void that the Ferengi were supposed to occupy. One of the most dramatic creative pivots in Star Trek history. Born from a performance choice that accidentally destroyed an entire species' credibility. 10. Tasha Yar's execution. Denise Crosby requested to leave The Next Generation after the first season. She felt her character, Lieutenant Tasha Yar, was being used as background decoration without meaningful storylines or character development. In what many interpret as retaliation for abandoning what the producers believed would be a hit show, the writers gave Yar a notoriously pointless, undignified death. She's unceremoniously slapped into the mud and killed by a sentient oil-slick monster named Armus in the episode Skin of Evil. No heroic sacrifice, no meaningful final words, no dramatic weight to her death whatsoever. It remains one of the most controversial and poorly executed character exits in television history. Crosby later expressed deep regret about leaving the show. She eventually returned for guest appearances. But the damage to Tasha Yar's legacy was permanent. Fans still debate whether the writers were justified or just petty. 11. The Water and Glitter Transporter. To save money on expensive 1980s computer-generated imagery, the iconic transporter effect was created using an incredibly simple practical technique. The special effects team filmed a high-speed camera pointed at a large tank of water with silver glitter being vigorously stirred into it, creating swirling patterns of reflective particles. That footage was then optically composited over the actors during post-production to create the shimmering dematerialization effect. The sparkle of 24th century technology, one of the most recognizable visual effects in science fiction history, was essentially a kitchen science experiment that cost almost nothing to produce. It's a perfect example of how creative problem-solving and practical ingenuity can create iconic imagery that audiences assume must have been expensive and technologically sophisticated. The transporter effect looked so good that it was used unchanged for 7 seasons. It became the standard for how beaming works in the Star Trek universe. 12. The Picard versus Riker conflict. The studio executives at Paramount absolutely hated Patrick Stewart as the lead of The Next Generation. They wanted a Kirk-like action hero, young, handsome, physically imposing, and American. They couldn't understand why Gene Roddenberry had cast a bald, 47-year-old British Shakespearean actor. The studio pushed hard for Jonathan Frakes and Commander Riker to be the real star of the show. I'm frequently requesting script changes where Riker would override Picard's orders or take charge of dangerous situations. The tension was so severe that Stewart genuinely believed he would be written out and replaced. Everything changed with the first season episode, The Big Goodbye. Stewart's performance in a holodeck film noir scenario finally convinced the studio that his gravitas and dramatic range were the show's secret weapon. From that point forward, the studio stopped trying to sideline Picard. They embraced Stewart as the face of the franchise, though the behind-the-scenes battle had nearly destroyed the show before it found its identity. 13. The Suicidal alternate pilot ending. The original draft of the 2-part pilot episode, Encounter at Farpoint, was significantly darker and more pessimistic than what eventually aired. In this version, Q's trial of humanity wasn't just a philosophical test, it was an inescapable trap designed to prove that humans were irredeemably violent and unworthy of existence. Captain Picard realizes that humanity cannot possibly win Q's rigged trial, that any answer they give will be used against them. In desperation, Picard prepares to initiate the auto-destruct sequence of the Enterprise, choosing to sacrifice the entire crew rather than allow Q to use them as pawns to condemn all of humanity. The original ending would have established The Next Generation as a much darker, more morally ambiguous show. But the network wanted optimism and hope. They got it. The show was better for it. 14. The unfair treatment scandal Gates McFadden, who played Dr. Beverly Crusher, was fired after Season 1. The reason: she frequently complained about the way female characters were written on the show, often as props, romantic interests, background decoration rather than fully developed professionals. She vocally criticized the writers' room for their treatment of women. The male producers retaliated by terminating her contract. McFadden was replaced by Diana Muldaur's Dr. Pulaski in Season 2. But the fan backlash was absolutely intense, making her one of the only actors in Star Trek history to be successfully unfired and brought back after being written out. Her return vindicated her complaints and proved that the show's treatment of female characters was a genuine problem that needed to be addressed. So would you serve under Captain Picard, or are you staying on the starbase waiting for a better assignment? The Next Generation almost didn't survive its first season. The writing staff quit. The studio wanted a different lead. The villains were a joke. The uniforms were causing spinal damage, and somehow it became one of the greatest science fiction series ever made. Let me know in the comments if you think Season 1 is a misunderstood masterpiece or a beautiful mess. If you want more declassified files on the ships that explored the final frontier, hit subscribe. See you in the next one.